You've done this. You pulled a loaf of bread out of the bag, or a block of cheese out of the fridge, and you found a spot of green or white fuzz growing on it. And like almost every person alive, you took a knife, cut around it, and ate the rest, told yourself it was fine now, the bad part was gone. I want you to hold on to that memory for the next 20 minutes, because by the end of this video, that exact habit, one you have probably done a dozen times without a second thought, is going to look very different to you. Here's a number I want you to sit with. Researchers writing in the journal Environmental Health Perspectives estimated that a single mold toxin, one that hides in ordinary pantry staples, factors into somewhere between 25,000 and over 150,000 cases of liver cancer worldwide every single year. Not heart disease, not a rare tropical illness, liver cancer from food sitting in kitchens that look exactly like yours. I'm Dr. Seo. And today I'm going to walk you through 6 things in the average pantry, foods most people think of as healthy, sensible, budget-friendly choices that can carry this toxin. We'll get to all 6, but I want to tell you right now so you have a reason to stay with me. The 6th one on this list isn't even a food, it's a habit. It's something almost everyone watching this video does in their own kitchen right now, believing that it makes food safe again. It doesn't. And when we get there, I think it's going to change how you look at your own refrigerator for good. I've spent more than 15 years in internal medicine and nutritional biochemistry, which is really just the study of what food does to the body once you stop looking at the plate and start looking at the cells. I'm not here to sell you a supplement or scare you into buying a course or tell you to throw out half your kitchen. I'm here to give you the research plainly and let you decide what to do with it. That's the whole job. So let's start with the organ we're actually talking about today, because I don't think most people have thought about their liver since the last time a lab test came back with a slightly high number and nobody explained why. Your liver is about the size of a football, sitting just under your rib cage on the right side. It is, without exaggeration, the hardest working chemical processing plant in the entire body. Every drop of blood leaving your stomach and intestines passes your liver, filters toxins out of that blood, breaks down medications so they can do their job and then leave your system, manufactures the proteins that let your blood clot properly, stores the fuel your body runs on overnight while you sleep, and quietly repairs its own cells when they're damaged over and over, day after day. Here's the part that should concern you a little. Your liver has almost no pain receptors. It can be under real, measurable stress and inflamed beyond discard and working overtime, and you will feel nothing. No ache, no warnings, twinge, nothing at all, until the damage is advanced enough that other systems start failing around it. That's why it's sometimes called a silent organ. It doesn't complain until it's in real trouble, which means the only real protection you have is knowing in advance what actually damages it, because your body isn't going to tell you in time. And after 50, this matters more, not less. Liver cells do regenerate. That's one of the genuinely remarkable things about this organ. But the speed and efficiency of that repair slows with age the same way healing a cut takes longer at 65 than it did at 25. Decades of ordinary, everyday exposures, the ones too small to notice on any single day, add up in a way they simply couldn't have by the time you were 40. So keep 3 words in your head as we go through this list, because you're going to see all 3 of them again and again. Invisible, heat stable, cumulative. The toxin we're talking about today is called aflatoxin. It's produced by 2 molds in particular, Interschuch Aspergillus flavus and Aspergillus parasiticus, which grow on crops like grains, nuts, and dried fruit, especially when they've been exposed to heat, humidity, or improper storage, sometimes before the food ever reaches the store. It is invisible because you cannot always see the mold that made it, and even when the visible mold is gone, the toxin can remain behind. It is heat stable because normal cooking, baking, roasting, or frying does not reliably destroy it. The temperatures required to break it down are far beyond anything happening in your oven or your frying pan. And it is cumulative because your liver absorbs a little of it here, a little there over years. And the damage to liver cell DNA builds quietly in the background. The World Health Organization's Cancer Research Agency, the IARC, classifies aflatoxin B1 as a Group 1 carcinogen. That's their highest category, meaning the evidence in humans is considered conclusive, not possible, not probable, but confirmed. It is, by the data we have, the most potent naturally occurring liver carcinogen currently known. And here's a detail I think about often in clinic. Its danger multiplies sharply in people who also carry chronic hepatitis B or C or who drink heavily, because the liver is essentially absorbing 2 hits at once. If either of those applies to you or someone you love, everything I'm about to tell you matters even more, and I'll come back to that. Now, this isn't a video about panic. This is a video about 6 specific ordinary things sitting in kitchens exactly like yours, ranked so the one that surprises people the most comes last. Let's start. Number 1, peanuts and peanut butter, especially the kind from bulk bins, farmers markets, or small batch and imported brands rather than major national labels. I'll tell you why this one earns the top of the list. Peanuts are, you crop for crop, one of the most consistently studied sources of aflatoxin contamination in the world because peanuts grow underground in warm, humid soil, precisely the environment Aspergillus molds love. Large commercial peanut butter brands in the U.S. are required to test rigorously for aflatoxin under FDA oversight, and that testing genuinely works. But bulk bin peanuts, homemade peanut butter ground in store, and some imported brands don't carry the same consistent testing record, and that's where contamination has repeatedly turned up in food safety surveys. So what do you do tonight? You don't need to give up peanut butter. It's a genuinely good source of protein and healthy fat. Buy from major, established brands with visible testing standards. Store the jar in a cool, dry place, and if you ever open one that smells musty, bitter, or simply off, don't taste it to check. Just throw it away. Number 2, cornmeal grits, corn-based flours, and corn products that have been sitting in your pantry for a while. Corn is, alongside peanuts, one of the 2 crops most heavily studied for aflatoxin risk because drought-stressed corn is especially vulnerable to the mold that produces it, and that stress happens somewhere in the world's corn supply almost every growing season. The toxin can be present in the kernel itself, invisible well before any grinding, packaging, or cooking happen. And again, your stovetop won't fix it. So what do you actually do? Buy cornmeal and corn flour in quantities you'll use within a few months. Rather than stockpiling a giant bag, store it in an airtight container somewhere, cool and dark, and check it before you cook. A musty smell or any visible discoloration means it goes in the trash, not the pot. Number 3, and this is where I want you to lean in a little because it surprises most people. Brazil nuts and pistachios, specifically when they're bought in the shell and kept in the pantry for months at a time. These 2 tree nuts have repeatedly shown up with higher rates of aflatoxin detection in food safety testing than most other nuts, and the shell, ironically, is part of the problem. It traps moisture around the nut instead of letting it dry out, creating a small, humid pocket that's close to ideal for mold growth. I know Brazil nuts get talked about constantly for their selenium content, and that's real. They're an excellent source of it. But a food being good for one organ doesn't automatically mean it's neutral for another. So here's what to do. Buy shelled nuts when you can, in amounts you'll actually eat within a couple of months. Store them in the refrigerator or freezer rather than a warm cupboard. Cold, dry conditions dramatically slow mold growth, and if a nut tastes bitter, sharp, or simply wrong, spit it out. That bitterness is sometimes your body's own early warning system doing exactly what it's supposed to do. We're about to hit numbers 4 and 5, and I want to flag these 2 together because they're the pair almost every health-conscious viewer gets wrong, precisely because both of them sound like the responsible. Number 4, dried chili powder, paprika, and other dried spice blends, especially ones that have been sitting in your spice rack for a year or 2. Dried spices made from ground peppers are grown, dried, and often stored in warm, humid regions. And that combination, drying in open air, then sitting in warehouses and shipping containers, has led to real, documented aflatoxin contamination incidents in the spice trade over the years, including product recalls. And because ground spice is a fine powder, there's no visible mold to warn you the way there might be on a whole peanut or a nut in its shell. It just looks like paprika. So what's the move? Buy spices from established brands in reasonably sized containers rather than enormous bulk bags that will sit for years. Store them away from heat and direct light, not right next to the stove, which is where most people keep them, and treat spice racks the way you treat a refrigerator if it's more than 2 or 3 years old. Its risk profile is simply different than it was on the day you bought it, so replace it. Number 5, dried figs and bulk dried fruit more broadly. Dried fruit has a wonderful reputation, and in many ways it's earned. It's fiber, it's potassium, it's a genuinely better choice than a candy bar. But the drying process concentrates more than just sugar and flavor. If mold growth happened at any point before or during drying, the toxin concentrates right along with everything else, and dried figs in particular have shown up repeatedly in aflatoxin testing programs internationally, especially imported product from regions where drying happens in open-air conditions. So what should you actually do? Choose dried fruit from brands with visible quality and safety testing rather than the least expensive bulk bin option. Inspect the fruit before eating it. Any fruit that looks shriveled in an unusual way, has a powdery coating, or smells sharp or musty should go straight in the trash out and store your dried fruit in the refrigerator once it's opened, which meaningfully slows any further mold growth. Now, number 6, this is the one I promised you at the start, and I want to say plainly why it earns the top spot on this list. It's not a food at all. It's a habit that almost every single person watching this does, that feels completely reasonable, and that your own grandmother probably taught you. Cutting the mold off. Here's what I need you to really understand. When you see a spot of visible mold on food, that spot is only the part that made it to the surface. Mold spreads underneath through thread-like structures called hyphae, reaching well beyond what your eye can see, and on soft, moist, or porous foods, those threads and any toxin that came with them can travel far past the edge of that fuzzy spot. This is exactly why the USDA's own food safety guidance draws a hard line based on the food itself. For hard, dense, low moisture foods is a block of hard cheese, a firm salami, a solid carrot. Cutting off a generous inch around the visible mold and eating the rest really is considered safe, because mold struggles to travel through dense, dry material. But for soft, moist, or porous foods, bread, soft cheeses, jam, cooked grains, legumes, and yes, nuts, the official guidance is to throw the entire item away, not scrape off the spot, not toast it a little longer, the whole thing gone. I understand why this feels wasteful. I understand why it goes against instinct and against what you were raised to do. But I want you to picture the two habits side by side, cutting mold off a loaf of bread to save 50 cents of food versus what that same habit, repeated for decades, quietly asks of an organ that never once tells you it's struggling until it's already in trouble. When you weigh it that way, I think the instinct starts to change. If you can see the mold, you've already missed the toxin. That's the whole thing to remember, and I'm going to say it again before we're done, because it's the single idea I most want you to leave with today. So how do you actually build this into a normal life without turning your kitchen into a source of anxiety? Let me give you a few habits. Nothing complicated, no special equipment required. First, shop for smaller quantities of anything that's genuinely at risk. Nuts, cornmeal, dried fruit, ground spices, rather than the giant economy-size bag that sits open for a year. It looks like a better deal at the register. It often isn't once you account for what sits unused past the point where storage conditions matter. Second, move the vulnerable items in your pantry into the refrigerator or freezer once they're opened. Cold, dry conditions dramatically slow mold growth, and this single habit alone closes most of the gap. Third, trust your senses and don't overrule them out of politeness or habit. A musty smell, a bitter taste, an unusual powdery coating. These are your body and your sense doing exactly the job they evolved to do. Don't argue yourself out of that instinct because the food was expensive or because you don't want to waste it. Fourth, and this is where I want to bring in something from my own background because it fits here honestly, not as decoration. In traditional Korean households, when families make doenjang, the fermented soybean paste that's been part of Korean cooking for centuries, they take real, deliberate care with the mold that grows on the soybean blocks, called meju, while they dry. Good airflow, controlled humidity, careful attention to which mold takes hold and which doesn't. That instinct, and mold is not one single thing, and where and how it grows matters enormously, is centuries old, and it happens to be exactly right. The mold cultivated on purpose in doenjang, called Aspergillus oryzae, is a completely different organism from the Aspergillus flavus that produces aflatoxin, even though both are technically mold. One is invited, the other is an intruder. And I'll say this plainly because I don't want you to walk away with the wrong idea. This doesn't make every traditional or fermented food automatically safer. Korea actually maintains some of the strictest aflatoxin testing standards in the world, specifically for products like doenjang and dried red pepper flakes, gochugaru, precisely because the same warm, humid drying conditions that make good fermentation possible can also, if care isn't taken, let the wrong mold in. Tradition earns its safety through care and attention, generation after generation, not simply through being old or being called natural. Fifth, and this is the mindset I really want to leave you with, this isn't about giving up peanuts or corn or nuts or dried fruit or your favorite chili powder. These are broadly healthy foods, and I'm not telling you to clear out your pantry in a panic. This is about sourcing and storage, buying from brands that test, keeping things cool and dry, using them within a reasonable window, and respecting the line between food that's safe to trim and food that needs to go in the trash whole. Let me tell you about a patient I'll call Robert, 68, retired, living alone since his wife had passed a few years earlier. Robert did everything he thought a health-conscious person should do. He ate lean, he ate simply, and because he was on a fixed income, he shopped in bulk to stretch his money further. Big bags of mixed nuts, bulk bins of dried fruit, a giant tub of natural peanut butter that took him the better part of 4 months to work through, kept in a cupboard above the stove because that's where the jar had always lived in his kitchen. At a routine physical, his liver enzymes came back mildly elevated. Nothing dramatic, nothing that screamed emergency, just a number slightly outside the normal range that, frankly, a lot of physicians might have brushed past with a "let's recheck in 6 months." But we talked it through together, and when I walked through his pantry with him, item by item, the picture became clear. Nothing dramatic had happened to Robert. There was no single bad meal, no obvious culprit. It was years of small, invisible, cumulative exposure, sitting quietly in a kitchen that looked, in every visible way, completely normal. We didn't overhaul his diet. We changed how he bought and stored 6 or 7 items, moved his nuts and his peanut butter into the fridge, and had him replace his spice rack instead of holding on to containers that had been there since before his wife passed. 6 months later, his numbers had moved back toward normal. He told me it felt like something he was adding to his health, not another thing being taken away from him. That stayed with me, and it's a large part of why I wanted to make this video. If I'm honest with you, this is the thing that frustrates me most in my own field. Aside, this information isn't secret. It's published, it's peer-reviewed, it's sitting in government food safety guidance that anyone can look up. And somehow it almost never makes it to the dinner table or the 15-minute appointment where there's barely time to review medications, let alone talk about pantry storage. It fails the parent who's shopping in bulk to stretch a budget. It fails the person living alone who reheats and restocks the same few staples out of habit, with no one else in the house to notice when something's been sitting too long. It fails the careful meal prepper who's certain they're doing everything right, because on paper they are lean protein, whole grains, dried fruit instead of candy. And the piece nobody told them about is storage, not ingredients. Now, a few honest caveats because I'd rather you hear them from me than discover them on your own later. Everything I've described today is general guidance, based on published research, and it isn't a substitute for your own doctor knowing your own history. If you have chronic hepatitis B or C, if you drink alcohol regularly or heavily, or if you already have a diagnosed liver condition, your margin for this kind of cumulative exposure is genuinely smaller, and I'd encourage you to be stricter with everything on this list, not more relaxed. It's also worth knowing that many common medications, statins, certain pain relievers, some antibiotics, are processed through the liver, and a liver that's already under quiet stress has less reserve to handle that job well. If any of this applies to you, it's worth asking your physician directly about a liver function panel at your next visit. A simple blood test that checks enzymes like ALT and AST, even if nothing feels wrong. Remember what I told you earlier, your liver often won't tell you anything is wrong until it's already well along. Nothing I've said today should ever be a reason to skip a screening your doctor has recommended, stop a prescribed medication, or delay a checkup because you feel fine. Healthy liver are not always the same, especially past 50. This video is educational information based on published research, not personalized medical advice, and I genuinely encourage you to talk with your own physician or a registered dietitian before making major changes to your diet, particularly if you're managing an existing liver condition, chronic hepatitis, or taking medications that are processed through the liver. Let's bring it all together quickly because I know that's a lot to hold on to. Peanuts and peanut butter. Buy from tested, established brands and keep them cold once opened.
Cornmeal and corn products. Buy small, store airtight, and trust your nose. Brazil nuts and pistachios, shelled, refrigerated, used within a couple of months.
Dried chili powder and spice blends. Now replace them more often than you think you need to and keep them away from the heat of the stove. Dried figs and bulk dried fruit. Choose tested brands. Inspect before eating. Refrigerate once opened. And the one that matters most, the one I'd ask you to start with tonight if you only change a single thing. Stop cutting mold off soft, moist foods and eating the rest. Bread, soft cheese, jam, cooked grains, nuts. Yeah, if you see mold, the whole thing goes in the trash, not just the spot. You can't see a mold toxin. You also can't undo what it's already done by scraping the fuzzy part off the top. That's the idea I most want to stay with you after this video ends, not as something to fear, but as something to simply know, the way you know to check an expiration date or wash your hands before you cook. If any of these 6 surprised you, I'd genuinely like to know which one. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And I promise you're not the only person who's been cutting mold off bread for 30 years without a second thought. And if there's someone in your life who shops in bulk or lives alone or reheats the same few pantry staples out of habit, send them this video. It takes 10 seconds to share, and it might be the 10 seconds that actually changes what's sitting in their cupboard tonight. If you want more real sourced information about what's actually happening inside your body after 50, not fear, not hype, just the research and what it means for you, subscribe and stay close. Because next week I'm looking at 5 everyday drinks that are quietly raising blood pressure in people who've never smoked a cigarette or added a grain of salt to a meal in there. You'll want to see what's on that list. I'll see you there.